Well, hello, all. Welcome to the webinar on protecting access to and protecting the rights to access contraception in North Carolina and around the country. This is a faithful response webinar. We've invited clergy people and people of common good faith from around North Carolina and around the United States to pay attention to this very important issue. So my name is Doug Padgett. I'm really glad to be your host tonight. Over the next hour or so, we're going to hear from a number of people who know a lot about this issue, people who have worked very hard on connecting around the issue of the right to contraception in North Carolina and the United States, and people who are working in faith spaces, people who are pastors, people who are community organizers, people that are activists on this issue. So we hope that you learn a lot tonight. There's frankly a lot to learn. To be blunt, my work right now is working with Americans for Contraception. You can see the logo here in the corner. You can head to americansforcontraception.org. And if you're asking yourself the question I was asking myself when I started working on this project, do we really have to be concerned about losing access to the right to contraception in the United States? Is that really something that we should be worried about? Because look, there are a lot of things that we have to worry about in our country, in our own lives, in our families, in our states, in the world. Is the right to contraception really at risk? Now, you wouldn't be an oddball for asking that question. There's a lot of people who have discovered, oh yeah, that's a very, very real question. There's a lot of reasons that for that. One of those reasons is that after the Dobbs decision, which was the Supreme Court case that overturned the precedent-setting case of Roe versus Wade, giving people in every state the right to access abortion, there was a concurring opinion written by Justice Thomas, who's the longest-serving justice on the current U.S. Supreme Court. He has a lot of influence, a lot of sway, and a lot of power, even though a lot of us feel that his opinions are outside the norm. His opinion did win the day when it came to the Dobbs decision, and he wrote in the concurring opinion about the rationale for why Roe versus Wade should be overturned. And the same rationale, he said, that applied to the overturning of Roe versus Wade should be something that would apply to another case from 1965, Griswold versus Connecticut. It's a contraception case. Now, this isn't going to be a dry webinar where I'm going to be showing you a whole lot of images of Supreme Court documents, other than this one. So look, one document, one book cover, one North Carolina state bill, and that'll be all the boring stuff that you have to look at on your screen. But while it might seem dry and boring, and I'll read that way, it's really important. And frankly, it's rather fascinating. So this is a screenshot of that very decision. And if you've never read a Supreme Court case before, you might, wouldn't be considered odd for not, for being uncomfortable with how it reads. But this is one of the paragraphs, and I've sort of highlighted there with a red line, this line where what Justice Thomas is talking about is how the Equal Protection Clause should not be applied to issues like abortion, and then goes on to say that I'll read the sentence for you. For example, once this court identifies a, quote, fundamental right for one class of individuals, it invokes the Equal Protection Clause to demand exacting scrutiny of the statutes that deny the right to others. It's kind of complicated, justice speak. But then he goes on to say, and he says, see these two particular cases. And then in the parentheses, he said, relying on Griswold, that's the case, 1965, Griswold versus Connecticut, which when the Supreme Court ruled on it, it said that states could not ban or make illegal contraception. He says, relying on Griswold to invalidate a state statute prohibiting the distribution of contraception to unmarried persons, statutory classifications implicating certain non-fundamental rights, meanwhile receiving only cursory review. Now, to a lot of us, that might seem like, just lawyer talk. But to people who pay attention to things, what it basically means is Justice Thomas believes the same rationale that was used to overturn Roe versus Wade could be and should be the same rationale to overturn Griswold versus Connecticut, which gave the right to people to access contraception without state interference. That caused a lot of people to say we need to get in order then that states start to pass laws guaranteeing the right to access and guaranteeing the protection of those rights. And we need to pass federal legislation to do so. I'm not here to be try to give justification for Justice Thomas, but his basic argument on all this is this shouldn't be being dealt with as a constitutional right. These are statutory decisions and need to be put into law. So in states, there are going to be laws, and there could be a federal law protecting the right to contraception. That's what's brought this to the surface for a lot of people. All right. So what should be done about it? Well, in a number of states, including in North Carolina, people have organized and put a bill together. You're going to hear from one of the state senators who's a sponsor of that bill in North Carolina. He's going to talk about what the bill is. We're going to actually look at the text of the bill. It's very short. It's like 2 sentences long, one of the shortest bills I've ever seen. We'll have a chance to look at that. And before that, we're going to sort of frame up the conversation about contraception as a whole. Because what this is fundamentally doing for a lot of faith leaders and a lot of people of faith and conscience is giving them the opportunity to ask the question, how should we respond to this issue? So one of the first people that you're going to hear from tonight is someone named Janelle Williams-Paris. Janelle wrote a book 20 years ago called Birth Control for Christians, Making Wise Choices. She's an anthropologist. She's a college professor. She's a Christian, and she's done a lot of thinking about these issues. And when we started doing this work with Americans for Contraception, one of the things that I wanted to do was to be in touch with Janelle because she has great insight into how people think about contraception, where it comes from, especially people of Christian faith. Now, there's going to be faith leaders watching this and engaging in this conversation that are from other traditions outside of Christianity, and they'll have their own story as well. But one of the things we wanted to do was to rally up leaders of faith and Christian leaders of faith to stand up in North Carolina and around the country to talk about this important issue. So we want to help you know how to think about that tonight. Now, Dr. Paris is in Pennsylvania at Messiah College, and we recorded an interview. In fact, all of the conversation partners you're going to hear from tonight are recorded interviews. Just made it a whole lot easier to have 8 different guests that are all recorded interviews. I was able to edit up these conversations so they're nice and tight, and they can really help us move the conversation along. So if you're watching this on any of the social streams and you want to put a comment in the chat, feel free. I will see that. If you're in the webinar, you can also put the comments in the chat, and I'll be able to see those too. And we could incorporate those as we need to throughout the course of this webinar tonight. So this is the first person you're going to hear from is Janelle Paris. And I asked her to talk about why she wrote this book and how the implication of this continues to play on today, and what the considerations are that we need to think about. So here is Dr. Janelle Williams-Paris. All right, give a little context for the book that you wrote. Now, you said 20 years ago. You've been a leading voice on these topics, at least in my world and in my head, for two plus decades. Talk about why you wrote that, why you thought that topic of birth control in Christians was something that would benefit from the kind of examination that can come from, a professionally trained person like you doing book level.
Well, I'm a Christian. I'm a church member. I have been my whole life. I'm a Christian college professor. My field is anthropology, which is very, very broad. And one of the things I explored was Christians and birth control. I used to be a fertility awareness instructor. So I taught couples and women how to monitor signs of fertility in their bodies and then make decisions about whether to pursue pregnancy or avoid pregnancy. And through that work as a fertility awareness instructor, I listened to so many couples and so many women and their hopes and their fears about what the sexual part of their lives could mean and what place pregnancy might have in their lives. So many complicated, nuanced stories from Christians who thought so carefully about ethics and about their relationships. So the book that I wrote, Birth Control for Christians, was a way to just make public and to share ways of thinking carefully about our motivations for using birth control, our choices and how we make those choices, and then how we hold the consequences or the outcomes of our choices.
What did you hear from people in those, not only in the work on the book, but previous to that led you to want to pursue this? What were you hearing from people about their experience around these thoughts?
I learned from different couples and individuals that no one form of contraception is right for everyone. And even for one person or for a couple, their needs change over the course of their lives. And so I saw people picking and choosing from all the different contraceptive methods that are available and thinking really carefully, like, what is our relationship like? How do we communicate? What rhythm of life do we have so that one method might fit better than another? Do we ever want to have children? Do we want to have more children?
Hmm.
Sometimes the issue of birth control is the spark for thinking about the quality of a marriage in a relationship or people's dreams for their lives, how people want to serve in their communities and in their church, and what kind of family size can exist alongside God's call to serve others. And birth control is about life, and it's about the value of persons. Christians care about these things for good reason. Most people I listened to in their ethical reasoning did not think they were playing God. They felt like God had given them intelligence and creativity and responsibility to make choices. I think of it kind of like seatbelts. Are you playing God when you put on a seatbelt? We don't just trust God when any
Right.
kind of naive way when we drive our cars, or when we use Band-Aids, or when we use
Yeah.
penicillin. Um, God gave us, God gave humans intelligence and creativity, and we use it in amazing ways to make technologies and to make safety and supports for our lives. So I hear Christians talking about birth control in that light. Wow, this is a big responsibility. Whether or not to have a family,
Yeah.
having sex, big responsibility. How will I carry that? And I can pray and stay connected to God as I make decisions.
Hmm. Are there some birth control methods that the kind of people you think a lot about and have written to and spend time with, or even now in a Christian college setting, that people are more comfortable with as Christian people on the whole? Like, well, sure, there's a range of birth control options. These seem more reasonable to my faith than others. Is that a thing?
There's a range of birth control options, and still, despite all available information in the digital age, there are myths and rumors, and it's difficult to find trustworthy information
Hmm.
about how birth control methods really work. And this area of life is still kind of taboo. We might
Mhm.
Google it when we're on our own. It's hard to ask a question at church, and it might feel hard to ask a question even of a doctor. So, information finding about different methods is surprisingly still difficult.
Hmm.
Um, Christians are often comfortable with mechanical methods like a condom, where it's an object and it's just there. We tend to get more ethically concerned about hormonal methods, things that alter the body in a way that makes conception less likely, or methods like hormonal methods and IUDs that we don't fully understand their mechanisms of action, but they certainly act in numerous ways. So they might mostly prevent conception. They could reject implantation. We're not positive if they do or how often they do. So Western medicine is still coming to understand precise mechanisms of action. We know these methods help prevent pregnancy, but when Christians ask extremely specific questions, exactly how do they work and how frequently, um, we don't always have all the information we need. And
Hmm.
so then Christians tend to be more concerned about those methods.
Hmm. Are those the primary ethical concerns that you feel like Christian people bring to this topic? That, hey,
There's one there's one ethical concern about, should anybody use birth control at all? Is it our place to decide how many children we have? That's one conversation amongst some Christians.
Mhm.
Not all Christians. Lots, perhaps more Christians are concerned about abortion and are thinking, when is birth control abortion?
Mhm.
And they don't want to go anywhere near that. And that's a concern about um, preventing implantation. or rejecting, yeah, rejecting a very, very early pregnancy, I guess. Um, and so now we're not just talking about contraception, we're also talking about abortion and making very fine grained distinctions between the very, very early days of life around
Yeah.
conception. Issues around contraception and abortion around life are partly very serious ethical issues that we work out in our lives and in our families. They are also, at the same time, political issues. And a stance on abortion in particular, pro-life, pro-choice, is like a symbol or a flag, and it stands for a host of other issues. And so people may vote on these issues without actually thinking through all the science and without actually needing to make decisions in their own lives.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to be clear. Are we talking about a personal, careful, spiritual decision-making process, or are we talking about a political process? They are connected. They are intimately connected, but they are different realms. There was a fear and a worry about women. I hear it at Christian women's conferences that the worst thing you can do is have an abortion or have sex outside of marriage, and that would be your greatest secret. Kind of who knows what women are doing in secret.
Wow.
So this desire to know and control and not let women have autonomy. Oh yeah. I was much more engaged with like real couples that were trying to think about when to have children. And they were communicating with each other. That's why they came to me. So yeah. But like Carl Jung, like what are the parts within us that motivate the things that we say and do in public? You're not going to find that out when you're at a rally or a public event. You'd have to really get to know someone.
That's right.
If there's internal parts or memories that someone's trying to protect. I'm sure that's all over these kinds of issues.
Oh, that's a great point. Okay, will you say more about that? What, like the difference between what someone says in public spaces or, I don't know, agenda-driven conversations compared to what their own real lived experience is?
I think public leadership and public work is powerful when it harmonizes with who a person really is, when there's just a deep level of integrity. But we know there's lots of breaches between who people are in public and who they are in private.
Yeah.
They may be trying to, and it's not always just ugly hypocrisy. It can be private pain, private wounds, private regrets that we're sort of working out through our public work, and people, you might not even be self-aware of it. I mean, when you consider the hopes and the fears that we bring to our romantic relationships, our sexual relationships, our marriages, and the hopes and fears that we bring to pregnancy possibilities. We might really, really want to be pregnant, might really, really want not to be. The ethical weight in those moments is huge because things can go very well, things can go very wrong, and our choices really matter. So those are very weighty moments, and sometimes we come to contraceptive thinking in a moment of distress or worry or panic or fear or even elevated hope. But those are almost like agitated states. So I do wish that we had face-to-face communities where we are known and we are loved and people know our stories and hold our stories as they unfold. So that when those times of elevation or of risk or of stress or of harm, when those moments come up, we're held within a community of people who know our story and then can help us think about a pressured situation where a decision has to be made.
Well, I hope you found that as positive and riveting as I did. I think there's something really great about it. I love how Janelle took us to a place where she said, look, these are human issues. And I've been a pastor for more than 35 years. And I know that a lot of our faith communities want to care for people. I also know that in most religious communities, we never talk about contraception. It's just not a topic that comes up. It's not something that people preach on. It's not something that people run small groups about. Very rarely in the traditions that I've seen inside of Protestant churches, and sometimes in Catholic churches, it could be a little bit different, but mostly it's not talked about. And that's something that we believe would be important because if we're going to talk about the importance of contraception in law, and we know it's impacting people, those of us who are part of faith communities, it's important that we engage this issue as a human issue, as well as a political issue or an ethical issue. So, part of what we're hoping to do tonight is to give you encouragement, to give you context, to give you content on how you could engage in talking with people in your community and to ask them to be part of it. And if they then want to be part of it further, or you want to be part further of helping to make sure that in North Carolina and in other states, that laws stay consistent, allowing people to access contraception and not have the government inside of the very intimate relationships that Janelle was just describing, then we want you to be part of this effort. On the screen right now, you'll see the Stay Connected at AFC Ed Fund, AFCEDFUND.org. That's a website you can go to. You can put your name and email address in there. We'll stay in touch with you and help you figure out how to be in touch with your legislator, how to be more active on these issues, how to integrate these issues with others. If this is something that's important to you, either for North Carolina or at the federal level or in your own state when these laws are going to be brought to the forefront. And that's the thing. There are going to be laws either saying to protect the right to access contraception, or some states may bring laws that want to restrict access to contraception. So if you want to be engaged in this, go to AFCEDFund.org and you'll be able to put your email address in there. You're now going to hear from John Pavlovitz. John lives in Wake Forest, North Carolina. John is somebody who works not only in North Carolina, but elsewhere on helping people of faith and conscience and goodwill to engage in important issues. And this is a conversation that we had a couple of weeks ago. And for this entire webinar, I'm wearing the same outfit. Okay, now these interviews have been recorded on different days, except for this interview with John. I was out of uniform when it came to this particular interview. So I kept one outfit on, knowing we were going to do these number of interviews because I didn't want the outfits to become something that would be distracted. I want you to be able to hear the people. So feel free to be distracted on this one, and then pay attention also to John Pavlovitz.
I have, and being someone who's on the front lines as a faith leader in a progressive context, it's something that we talk about a lot in these circles because it is the heart for me of what it means to be a person of faith, is to have the God-given right to choose what happens to and inside someone's body. And so that's really something that's at the heart of so much of the work that I and others like me, like-minded people of faith, morality, and conscience are working on, protecting these very rights.
Now, it seems to me that, knowing our ages, we've grown up with the assumption that you could buy contraception anywhere in America for any reason, as long as it's, safe. Does this scare you additionally that we're in a place where we're having to have a conversation or talk about the need to protect the right to buy contraception?
I think you see in these bills an effort to further and further control using a really rigid theological framework. And really, it speaks to the pervasion of a theocratic movement that we haven't seen in our lifetimes. These were protections that I think many of us assumed were going to be givens for the rest of our lives. And the fact that we're now have to have these conversations again, and we're having to fight these battles legislatively again, is really shocking, but it's a symptom of what's happening throughout the country.
Now, on that note, there are people who, when this topic comes up, they're like, what in the world? No one's going to take contraception away. That's not going to happen. That's fear mongering. Why are you all so nervous about it? Do you have real fear that these kinds of limitations could actually come into existence?
These are conversations we're having in North Carolina all the time because the legislative balance is so precarious that we thought for a long time we could rest in these issues and move on to other work that we are doing for the common good. And the fact that we're now having to pull back and fight these battles again, it is alarming. And it's something that I, as a parent of two teenagers, I think about it all the time. I want them to have the world that I was able to grow up in. And in these formative years, it's a terrifying thought to think that they wouldn't have it.
Well, one of the big arguments that religious people make about the contraception's negative effect on society is that it leads to promiscuity, and that somehow promiscuity is an ill that needs to be solved in this way. Do you remember hearing that? I mean, you worked in a lot of across a wide range of spaces in religion and with teenagers and with families. How do you think about that argument, and what do you think people need to keep in mind when they hear people either subtly or very directly making that argument that contraception leads to moral decline?
The argument that access to contraception will make someone more promiscuous, it just never bears out. As someone who has been raised in the Catholic Church and ministered in an evangelical context, I found that the opposite was true, that the more you teach young people about contraception, the more responsible they are, the more aware they are of the science, the more they are aware of the reality, and they're actually much more responsible in the choices they make. They're not burdened by some sort of theological or moral guilt, but really about the reality of their bodies. And that's what we want people to have. We want people to be responsible with the decisions they make, but that means that they have to have all the information available and all the options available to them. I work here in North Carolina with young people who are aging out of the foster care system. Many of them are from Black and brown populations. And we have over 12,000 young people in the foster care system in North Carolina. And if the people who are perpetuating these anti-contraception bills actually cared about life, that wouldn't be true. We wouldn't have any young people in the foster care system. So the heart of people like me who are pushing against these anti-contraception bills is to make sure that all the life in North Carolina is protected and loved, especially once it leaves the birth canal. As a pastor, I really want to speak to people of faith who are in what I would call the humane middle, because these issues of contraception and the control of that should really be central. It should be something that we're aware of and involved in and speak loudly into, because in a larger context, it speaks to the freedoms that we believe we have as human beings created by God with the free will to choose everything that happens in and within and around our bodies.
Awesome, man. Okay, buddy. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.
Appreciate it.
That's it.
Bye.
Bye.
John Pavlovitz has a great message for all of us, which is, look, we need to trust women and we need to trust men who are going to make decisions about the contraception that they want to use. And in North Carolina, we're now going to talk specifically about the bill in North Carolina. The bill that's before the Senate in North Carolina is one that says the state of North Carolina has no interest, no state interest in limiting access to contraception. That's the bill. Republicans are not saying yes to it yet. Now, bills take a while. You're going to meet one of the bill sponsors. His name is Greg Meyer, and Greg is an optimist. He's an optimist on this. You're going to pick that up from the interview with him. You're going to hear him saying that he thinks it's possible for this bill to pass. And he's also going to talk about the importance of people's engagement when it comes to passing bills. So we're going to talk a little bit about that bill in particular. Remember when I said I'm not going to bore you too much with a lot of legal text? Just a little bit more. So this is the bill in North Carolina. This is how the entire thing is structured. It's called Senate Bill 540. It's very short. I mean, a lot of those words on that page are just preamble and not sort of in the, cute School of Rock. School of Rock, House of Rock. What am I talking about? From the 70s. Not in that sort of cute way, like the preamble of the Constitution. The text itself is really quite short. Here's the actual text. So that's what you're looking on the screen now is the full bill. And here's the zoomed in part of just that text, right? The way it reads is the right to use contraception implicates the fundamental liberty to protect pregnancy. Making a statement there. It is the policy of the state of North Carolina that this state has no legitimate governmental interest in limiting the freedom to use contraception to prevent pregnancy. This act is effective when it becomes law. That is a 2-sentence bill. And the first sentence is just a declaration. The second sentence is where the meaning is. It's the policy of the state of North Carolina that the state has no legitimate governmental interest in limiting the freedom to use contraception to prevent pregnancy. So there's the bill. That's it. That's what Congress, that's what members of the House and of the Senate and the legislature in North Carolina will have a choice of voting on. They could have voted on it already. They could be voting on it right now. They didn't. They're in a special session. When they come back into session in 2024, this bill is going to be brought before them at the Senate level. And Greg Meyer, as I mentioned, is one of the sponsors of this bill. And he's going to encourage you, talking about the bill itself, but then also what does it take to motivate legislators. So this is going to be great information for those of you in North Carolina. And if you share this webinar with other people, either in the recording of this webinar, it's also on the Vote Common Good social media channels. Go to Vote Common Good on any of the social media places and you'll find this webinar, also simulcasting there. And you're going to have a chance to hear some great advice from Senator Myers on what can be done to influence a legislator. So here's that conversation with Senator Greg Meyer. So the bill itself, I've got it in front of me here. I've seen a number of legislative bills in my life. Honestly, I don't know that I've seen one that's this straightforward, short, and simple.
It's short.
I don't even know that there's but one period in the, it's 2 sentences long.
It's 2 sentences, right?
It reads, the right to use contraception implicates the fundamental liberty to prevent pregnancy. Second sentence. It is the policy of the state of North Carolina that this state has no legitimate governmental interest in limiting the freedom to use contraception to prevent pregnancy.
Look, it's a liberty bill. It's a freedoms bill. It's a small government bill. This is a bill that should appeal to the fundamentals of what folks who are traditional small government conservatives believe in, and appeal to the fundamentals of what folks like me, liberal folks who lean on policies that we think are pro-family and pro-individual rights. Like, this bill is the best of both worlds. And it's not hard to understand. It just says, hey, North Carolina, when it comes to contraception and your ability to use it to choose when you have a family, we're going to stay out of your way. That's it.
A number of people that I talk to in North Carolina, even faith leaders, and ask them to support this bill or to think about the right to contraception, they're not totally convinced that it can be as simple as it is. Like, why is anyone against this? And am I getting myself into something that's more than what it sounds like? Because it doesn't sound like anyone would be opposed to protecting the right for people to access contraception.
I hope they're right. I hope that it's true that there's no one who is opposed to protecting the right to contraception. But there's no piece of legislation, including the most common sense and the most agreeable, that gets done without a range of champions and without a call from the public. And so I can talk about why I think the bill hasn't passed yet, but ultimately, this isn't a high bar to entry bill. This is the type of thing that I think has the opportunity to help us rebuild the connections that we need to be able to take on reproductive health as an issue that isn't just completely divisive. I mean, I would hope this is an issue where we could come together.
And why is it not? Why have people from the range of political perspectives not come together around this bill?
I mean, I think that there is a focus in the Republican Party right now on how can they work on the abortion issue specifically, and we saw here in North Carolina that their effort on that this year was to put in place a 12-week abortion ban, and that they just had a singular focus on that. And we've not, because we were so polarized across the parties on that, there wasn't a lot of room for bipartisan work on other possible ways to address reproductive health, family health, etc. But we have in the past. We passed a bipartisan bill just a couple years ago that made it easier for women to get birth control pills directly from a pharmacist, and without having to go back to your doctor. And that was because Republicans and Democrats agreed that if you want to prevent unwanted pregnancies for whatever the unwanted reason is, if you want to prevent those, then you need to make access to birth control as easy as possible. What we want to do here with Senate Bill 540 is we just want to make it clear in a proactive way that North Carolina supports the right to contraception, because we believe that families, people should have the ability to control when and why and how they're ready to have children.
Do any legislators argue back on that? Anything else? Or is this more an issue of we're as a group just not talking about that issue right now? Or do you pick up other pushback?
We haven't gotten a chance to have that conversation yet, because in this year's legislative session, it was the first time we introduced the bill. Everything was highly polarized around abortion. This bill didn't get a hearing. This bill didn't draw on Republican co-sponsors yet, but the same Republicans who co-sponsored the legislation to make it easier to get access to birth control would likely be the ones that we would approach on this. And when we get past the most highly polarized moment that we've had on abortion, I think there will be opportunities for bipartisan work on this. What we need from an audience like your audience and from the general public is we need people to talk about this. We need people to talk to their legislators, both Democrat and Republican. This doesn't have universal Democratic support yet either, right? Like, we have a set of co-sponsors. I'm one of them, but we didn't get everybody from the Democratic caucus to sign on. And it's not there's opposition, it's just that there's not a call for it. And so we want to raise the conversation. We need folks who are working in communities to look at this as an opportunity and to be willing to talk to their legislators about why we should take this up next year or the year after, or whatever we can build enough support for it.
So let me ask you about that in and of itself, as opposed to whatever this bill is. There are a lot of people who believe that when they hear politicians say, hey, we need to hear from constituents about what matters to you, they don't really believe that. They feel like it's like getting a survey from Delta Airlines about how was your travel, and they're pretty sure Delta's not going to pay attention. Are you saying that people really do respond to constituency movement when it comes to the bills that they're going to support?
Like, people think that we're fake, that like we're not actual humans, that we only exist in the political media. And sometimes that hurts because they think that we're immune to the nasty things that they say. But the truth is that no politician is immune to people either asking them to do good things or saying bad things about them. Even the most entrenched, crusty ideologue on either side, even the person in the safest possible district who's never going to lose election, we all care what people say about us. You don't get into this business if you don't have an ego and an interest in being liked by the public. And I think one of the earliest lessons that I learned in the legislature was how so much policy is driven by so few voices and by powerful anecdotes rather than any overwhelming public interest or real scientific data. Like, when we're in committee and you hear people present, this is the bill that I have and why I'm advancing it, it often comes down to, well, I heard about it from one constituent, or I had a couple families, or this church in my community spoke up, or whatever it is. And that's the reason why they're doing it, is because of a relatively small number of people who spoke to them. And then they said, yes, they want to please those people. They want to do what folks in their community asked. Now, there are also times where people say no to organized voices. Of course, we know how that works in politics. But on something where there's not, a real logical reason for opposition like this, like your ability to get somebody to sign on to something like this is pretty realistic if you can just have the conversation with them.
When you say that legislators do respond to the concerns of constituents, there are many mechanisms that are put together for voters to communicate with their elected officials. There's these click-to-call programs. There's auto-generated surveys and emails. There are sign-on letters. Do they all work, or do you have particular advice for people who really care about this issue to want to break through the myriad options that there are for how someone can reach out to their legislator?
Every form of contacting a legislator makes a difference, but not every form has equal impact. And basically, what you should think about is the more time that your form of communication takes from me and my staff, the more impact that it's going to have on our decision making. So, for instance, I get an email once a week from an online petition site that shows all the petitions that people have signed on to about things that they want me to address, but it's just one email and I don't even click through to see all of the people who have signed on. It just tells me 6 people signed on this one this week and 600 people signed on this other one. It makes very little impact. If I get 600 emails from an auto-generated one-click email thing, that makes a much bigger impact than 6 emails from that same program. But an auto-generated form email gets sorted into a form email box in our system. 6 emails written by individuals with actual heartfelt thoughts get more time than 600 form emails. 6 phone calls to my assistant get even more time than those emails. 6 people visiting in me in my office get more time than those phone calls. And 6 people getting me to come and visit with them in the district get even more time than that. And so that way of like increasing the amount of time and exposure you have with the person you're trying to influence is a like direct impact on the way that we think about it. Our time is the most valuable thing we have. So the more of it you get, the more influence you have over us.
Is there a particular time in 2024 that you feel like would be ideal for someone to start communicating with a legislator about this particular bill?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I appreciate you asking it. We are likely going to be out of session from the beginning of November until sometime in late April, and that means that we'll be more likely to be in our districts than we will be in Raleigh. And you get more time when you meet with us at home in our districts, and if you come to meet with us in Raleigh. And we have to get our legislative agenda before we go back for our legislative session next April. So anytime between now and next April, if you can try and meet with folks while they're at home, that really is going to be the best time and best way to communicate with them.
What are the chances that a member of the House or the Senate knows anything about this bill already? So if someone's going to reach out to their elected official, what should they have that they're presenting? A copy of the text from this year's session, or what?
Yeah, have the bill and the bill number, be ready to show it to them. If you're meeting with a Republican member, be ready to talk to them about why it's only Democrats on this bill, but why you're still talking to them, why you hope they would sign on to it. Anything, that you can say about just what's the connection that you think they would most support it. But this isn't a complicated approach. It's not a complicated bill. It won't take people much time to understand it. And I really have a hard time imagining many people telling you that they would oppose it. I think people might tell you, oh, it's just not going to be our priority this year or whatever, but that's just a matter then of continuing to push it up the priority list. I don't think you're likely going into significantly hostile territory.
Pretty great, huh? I love his attitude. And I thought that advice about get engaged, talk to your legislator, it really does make a difference, really matters. Look, the number of people who are watching this webinar right now could have a major impact on this bill in North Carolina. This is something that I know in the work that we do at Vote Common Good. This is true over and over. Blessed are the organized, and the people who speak up and raise issues and talk to legislators tend to be heard much more than people who don't. Now, that doesn't take a lot of fancy math to figure that one out, right? Those who speak up tend to be heard more than those who don't speak up. So we encourage you to do it. Again, I'll remind you that AFC Ed Fund. That's short for Education Fund. AFCEdFund.org is a place you can go. If you put your name there, you'll receive some information from us about how you can be engaged in reaching out to your legislator, how you can be engaged in encouraging people and other campaigns that are going on, advertising campaigns, media campaigns, a whole bunch of things going on about this. This is going to be rolling out to other states as well. So if you know people that don't live in North Carolina but care about this, this is going to have to be happening in other states. All right, we're going to hear now from 3 pastors from North Carolina. And I thought it was important for a Faithful Response webinar to be able to hear from people who are pastors and how they think about this bill and how they think about the engagement of churches overall. And look, I'll tell you, as a pastor and now and somebody who's also an organizer and works in politics, so somebody who works in both religion and politics, not always the most fun at a party, but we have to be careful that we don't allow our religion and our perspectives of our faith to become one and the same with our political agendas, because it's not a right thing for any of us to basically think our religion should become the law of the state. Now, our religion should motivate us. Our religion should call us to good action. Our religion might even call us to particular beliefs in the world that might transpose into a way that we think about particular politics. But we shouldn't say, my holy text teaches, or in my tradition, we say this, therefore this should become the law. So we have to think in complex ways about how we're going to integrate our faith beliefs into our political beliefs. And we know how to do that in this country. This is good, hard work, and it's something we can all figure out how to do. So you're going to hear from three clergy members from North Carolina who I think you're going to really appreciate. Mary Elizabeth Henchy is from the mainline tradition. You're going to hear also from Paul McAllister from a Black church tradition, and you're going to hear from David Robertson from a evangelical background. So all of these people coming together, and I think you're going to appreciate this and the wisdom that they share and the approach that they have to it. So first of all, here's Reverend Mary Elizabeth. Mary Elizabeth, thank you so much for being a part of this. You were willing to speak at one of our press conferences that we held outside of the Capitol, and
Yes.
you're willing to be on this webinar. So these kinds of issues matter to you. Can you talk about why it matters to you as a person of faith and a faith leader in public spaces to be engaged in work like this?
Sure. There are a lot of reasons that I think that faith leaders need to be actively involved in everything that has to do with healthcare and supporting families, supporting women, supporting individuals as they make choices to take care of their bodies. Um, I think that when it comes to this contraception bill, one of the reasons it's really important for faith leaders to step into this space is that there has been so much rhetoric out of faith communities that has to do with abortion and being pro-life. And a lot of that rhetoric has included conversations about the need for people to make responsible choices and to use birth control. And there's a really ridiculous disconnect between using that kind of rhetoric, and I will call it rhetoric because I don't think that it actually matches what we believe as what I believe as a Christian pastor. But to use that kind of rhetoric about abortion and not allowing people to have access to healthcare, and then also not guarantee the sorts of protections that are necessary to make healthy decisions about your family planning. So I think that the fact that Christians have inserted themselves into this conversation so vocally and actually cause a lot of problem for women and for people that are hoping to make healthy decisions about their bodies means that in this instance, we must be involved in guaranteeing access to birth control. Now, on top of that, I'm really interested in the story about Jesus and the bleeding woman. That's a story in the gospel that I think doesn't get enough attention. There was a woman who had been bleeding for years and years and years, and we know that story has to have to do with menstrual bleeding. That's how a woman would be bleeding for years and years. And she begs Jesus for healing by just touching the hem of his robe in the story. She doesn't feel that she's even adequate to come to Jesus face to face. And Jesus heals her. Jesus knows that she is seeking healing. And the story is that Jesus offers her healing. And I think it's really important for us to claim that narrative, to claim that story, that not only does Jesus again and again and again care about our bodies, but specifically cared about this woman and her story that had to do with procreation, had to do with the way that her body was working, and her desire for healing from that.
Mm. Yeah, it's really an insightful story to bring into this because it also had to do with power, right? And who had the
Right.
power, and that's what this conversation feels like it's about for a lot of people, especially there in North Carolina. Who's going to set the rules and tell other people what they can and cannot have access to that they currently have access to? So it's a situation that seems so similar. But there's a lot of faith leaders who become uncomfortable with thinking about talking about specific political moments or bills that might be before the Senate. A lot of faith leaders feel like their job is to be a little bit more macro engaged in life and spirituality and the well-being and human flourishing, but they don't want to get into the particulars of politics and the particularities of bills. How do you think about that?
I think that it's important to be able to separate that sort of politicking from doing the justice work of advocating for people that are marginalized, advocating for people who are on the other end of a power differential, for advocating for people who the governmental systems are in, whose lives they're endangering because of the power differential. And so I just don't think that um, I don't think that it is ever the case that a pastor should feel that they cannot get engaged in policy conversations. Um, I understand why some pastors are going to take paths that have a little bit more to do with just caring for the people in their congregation. But for me, caring for people in my congregation means being present to advocate for things that they need to be whole and to be healthy and to thrive.
Mhm.
I think there's a common refrain from parishioners that they either want their pastors to be more vocal about policy issues or they want their pastors to be less vocal about policy issues. And you're going to face people that have an opinion about that no matter what you do. Um,
Yeah.
I want to give you permission as faith leaders. I want to give permission to faith leaders to get involved, to use your voice to advocate not only for the people that are in your congregation, not only for needs that you see arise because you know who gathers there and you know their struggles, but for people who might not come into your congregation, who might not currently be churched, but for whom you can be called to advocate because you are a faith leader and because you believe that God wants justice and wholeness and healing for all.
Such great advice, isn't it? Thank you, Pastor Mary Elizabeth. I know you're going to hear from Paul McAllister. Paul has served in churches, also does organizing, is engaged inside of the ecclesial part of society, and also involved in the business and governmental side. And his insights, I think, are very helpful, and you're going to really enjoy Paul McAllister.
I honestly think that our state legislature is meddling far too significantly in the lives of women and decisions that need to be made between them and their physicians, and also decisions that need to be made in a very private and personal manner. And it's one thing to want to protect the health of women, but this is not about health, similar to bills that dealt with all reproductive rights have really not addressed the health concerns of women. If these were the motivating factors, then you would see a different type of conversation. You would probably have more cooperation between both sides of the aisle, meaning those who are legislating against certain things and those who are legislating for. But these seem to be very unilateral, polarizing, highly conflicted arguments that are being made that are deeply distressing to women and their communities. So
Well,
I really feel, Doug, that the faith community needs to come together on this issue because it's about power, it's about control over women, it's about restricting access, and it's about limiting individual rights. This is the overarching argument that we're addressing when we talk about Senate Bill 20.
yeah, and that's one of the big issues that is the that brought this to the forefront is that Clarence Thomas wrote a concurring opinion in the Dobbs decision, saying that the very justification for overturning Roe versus Wade was that the privacy clause was not the proper argument. And then he went on to write, and the right to contraception, which caused a lot of people to say, well, then we need to start preparing for states to support the rights if it's possible that the Supreme Court's going to follow the lead of the longest serving justice, that right to contraception needs to be a state's issue.
Yeah, I'm deeply distressed by the fact that these bills that Clarence Thomas wrote about in the Dobbs decision are confronting same-sexual relationships, whether one agrees or disagrees, same-sex marriage, and the premise upon which these individual decisions in a democracy individuals should have the right to make. And so this kind of deployment of individual personal morality into law is problematic in a democracy. And what we see is there's not a coming together on these issues. There's a great divide that is further splintering the body politic in ways that cannot be useful, that cannot be helpful in a pluralistic society. And so if you talk about even racial equality and the right to marry someone of a different race, look at Clarence Thomas himself. And you see there is an obvious hypocrisy associated with many of these rulings. They cannot stand, they cannot be reflective of where we are today versus where we were in 1970, the early 70s with the Loving decision. We thought we were past all of that. But what we find ourselves experiencing is this regressive, retractive, reductionist way of thinking that does not move the culture forward and is not reflective of what we have learned since 50, 60 years ago.
And on this particular issue, it's a curious one because it's one that most faith communities also never talk about. They don't talk about contraception, birth control, family planning inside of many churches. Has that been your experience in church, or have you had a different experience in churches you've attended and churches that you've led where they've addressed issues of birth control, contraception, and so on?
You know, we have had the privilege of attending many different congregations and many different denominations down through the years. And I would say that conversations on contraception have largely been considered to be personal, private matters, from conservative churches to liberal churches to white churches, Hispanic churches, African American churches. It has always been the domain of families to make these personal decisions. These are intimate decisions, and they should not be legislated by conservative lawmakers or liberal lawmakers, for that matter, in legal venues. These things should be decided by the people for themselves. It's deeply troubling to me, Doug, that we even have to have this kind of conversation, and it makes you wonder what it bodes for the respect for human dignity and human decency that many of these legislators who are passing these laws have for people of color, because ultimately this is the target audience. Poor people who are white and black, but also women of color and their communities at large. And so this is part of the onslaught of the attack on these particular communities. And what needs to be done is faith communities need to understand the issues more collectively and come together across the board and resist these kinds of laws.
You're going to continue to hear this refrain through three more guests that we're going to have here on the webinar. Really appreciate what Paul had to say there, that these are issues that communities need to be engaged in, and we need to allow people the freedoms that they expect in this country. David Roberts is also a pastor from an evangelical tradition. He's in Charlotte, North Carolina, a church called Watershed. And you get this long range of people from a variety of church traditions, and that represents a significant cross-section of North Carolina and the rest of the country that are thinking about how we should be approaching this. And you're going to really appreciate, I believe, David's response to how they're thinking about these issues. So, David, how are you thinking about this issue of the right to contraception in the state of North Carolina?
I'm trying to think about it as a faith issue and not just as a political issue. I know there's often a taboo for faith leaders when it comes to, dipping your toes into politics. There's worries about partisanship and division and binaries and things like that. But I think we can separate the political from the partisan, and on a topic like this, would be getting people comfortable with faith and politics existing in the same realm amidst kind of the taboo about, partisanship and left, right, Democrat, Republican, and things like that. But I do think that there are universals. I mean, you could call them, things oriented towards the common good that are very, not just reasonable for faith leaders to take a public stance on, but perhaps necessity. I mean, Jesus had a public ministry. Jesus made, public pronouncements, most of which were concerned with the well-being of people in the here and now, not in the hereafter, not in the afterlife. I know people, talk about like to cite how much Jesus talked about heaven and hell, but even within those conversations, I mean, I think often his focus is first and foremost on the well-being, safety, livelihood of people now, and especially people who are disadvantaged, marginalized. And so yeah, it's always going to be messy. And so I understand the trepidation or the caution that faith leaders might feel, but if you want to get real basic and just use Jesus as our example, then there you have it. This was a public rabbi, doing work with the people, and that's our calling as well.
One of the curious things about this particular topic, the right to contraception, is churches, Protestant churches at least, the ones I've spent my life around, evangelical churches and mainline churches, they don't talk about this issue at all. The question of birth control and what birth control choices people should make rarely comes up in any public space. Has that been true for you as well in your ministry and your experience in churches?
It has, and I think it stems probably from its proximity to the pro-life, pro-choice, like abortion debate. We, just full disclosure, I'm part of a more progressive, some might say liberal, Protestant evangelical congregation. And even within a context like that, there is not a uniform or consistent position within the congregation, and probably not even within our pastoral staff, on like the abortion conversation or the abortion debate. And so, whereas I think something around contraception would probably be a little less charged, maybe a little less divisive, I think just the sheer proximity to a much more politicized, a much more, at times I think emotionally informed conversation around abortion, it sort of just swallows up the contraception conversation as well, which is unfortunate. Not that the abortion conversation is not also worth having and tarrying with or wrestling with in a faith context, but there's a lot of things related to contraception that I think that faith leaders across the political spectrum and congregations, be them predominantly sort of one side or the other or more mixed and diverse. I would like to think there's a lot of common ground people could or should be able to come to around contraception, especially if they had both space to get their questions answered and the opportunity to maybe kind of push through a lot of misconceptions related to contraception these days.
Yeah, boy, I think that's really well said. It's been my experience in a lot of churches. Anything to do with sexuality,
Hmm.
anything to do with particular difficult issues that we've dealt with, often have a set of no talk rules put
Yeah,
in place around them, where people even say, hey, abortion just chews up all the space. But truthfully, most people I know, they don't talk about that issue at all. They may
hmm,
have strong opinions,
yeah,
but we've probably talked longer about abortion right now than most people do in any conversation they have all year long, right? It just becomes almost a settled issue that's
yeah,
never really dealt with and talked about. And contraception, obviously, because its proximity not only to abortion, but to sex, becomes something that a lot of churches are very uncomfortable talking about in
mhm.
public spaces, or even in more intimate spaces of smaller groups of people.
Sure. I mean, I remember, recent, it was over a year ago, but when the Supreme Court, walked back Roe v. Wade, we as a pastoral team, we wrestled with how to address it, not necessarily to take a explicit position, but just to acknowledge and make space for the angst and the worry and
Hmm.
the frustration people within our congregation, women especially, were feeling in relation to that decision. And it was really interesting. We ended up settling on one of the people on our team wrote kind of like a poem or a reflection that tried to capture what she was feeling as a woman amidst that. And she was very, very intentional, very careful about holding space for a broad spectrum, even folks who maybe weren't showing up to the conversation the way she was. And even despite that intentionality, we still heard from folks within our congregation who might, you could say are on both sides of the issue, who were, I don't want to be uncharitable, but almost hearing what they wanted to hear or hearing what they were expecting to hear. Um, and so there's an intention and there's an impact distinction. We can have the best of intentions, but people show up to these conversations with so much assumption, so much baggage, sometimes hurt, genuine hurt, and at times misinformation. And so there's this cocktail of preconceived expectations that people arrive with, and I think it makes it really hard, even when you have pastors and faith leaders who want to be intentional about it. You're stepping into a minefield potentially, and people might not even realize
Yeah.
that they're carrying these things. But things might well up in them unconsciously that they didn't even realize had been embedded in them until the conversation begins.
Yeah. That's really insightful. And a lot of faith leaders are careful to be sure that whatever issues are going to be brought up in the public spaces of a church are things, first of all, that the church has something to say about,
Hmm.
and that are not going to create undue stress or turmoil in people's lives. So the list becomes increasingly short as,
Hmm.
different issues are put on this is now a troubling topic for me. And that's one of the things that we're trying to address here with this webinar, is to try to help people in churches, people in other faith communities, people who lead those faith communities, to know they can engage in this work. And it's something that I hope the benefit of this is not only this particular bill, North Carolina, and bills like it, and this particular topic, but just understanding that our faith communities can be much more helpful for people and how to engage in our civic life together. And what does it mean to live with one another in this world? It would be good if we found our faith communities to be an assistance and benefit and blessing to the life we're trying to live together in a state, in a county, in a country, in a world. Be important. Our last two guests are both organizers. You're going to hear from Janice Robinson, who runs Red Wine and Blue, North Carolina. She's going to tell you about what that effort is, an effort that connects women, specifically suburban women, into issues that matter. And then you're going to hear from Michael who's going to talk to you about what you can actually do to get involved in this kind of work. And again, you may want to go to AFC EdFund, AFCEDFUND.org to get on the list if you want to keep up and find out what this particular project is up to, Americans for Contraception, and what groups like Vote Common Good, the group that I run, are up to. So here's a conversation with Janice and the organizing that they're doing right there in North Carolina, and some invitations to be part of the work that she's up to. So Janice, so glad that you're here, and we're excited to have Red Wine and Blue to be a part of this webinar. Tell people what Red Wine and Blue is and the good work that you're doing.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you, Doug, for having me on. So Red Wine and Blue, we are a 501c3c4, a women-led organization. Of course, those are nonprofits. And what we do, we mobilize the diversity of suburban women. First of all, educating them at the fact that they do have political power. And then we train them how to use their political power around the issues that are important to them in their local community to have influence over making sure that their elected officials protect their interests and their values. We also push back on a lot of the disinformation and misinformation that's put out there by right-wing extremists around issues such as reproductive rights, gun safety, issues around public schools, discrimination against the LGBTQ community. And so we kind of do a two-pronged thing. We want to make sure that the issues that concern us as a diversity of suburban women, that our voices are amplified.
Talk about the importance of suburban women in this case, and why do you put particular energy onto organizing in the suburban spaces?
Yeah, because what we found is that for years, on the right, they seemed to have been going after white suburban women and starting to reach out to them and try to mobilize those women and really try to scare those women into really voting for their extreme candidates. And so what we found is that a lot of us who are suburban women, it's like, wait a minute, that was not, and a lot of times they were trying to say, well, suburban women feel this way, or, and so forth. But we were like, wait a minute, that's not how we feel. So we decided that, wait a minute, we need to make sure that our voices are amplified too. And so we decided it's time to make sure that the voices of suburban women who do not agree with some of this extremism are amplified. And so now we have over 500,000 women across the country that's connected with Red Wine and Blue. Here in North Carolina, in under 2 years, we have over 20,000 that's connected with us. And so, I mean, even when it comes to, groups like this Moms for Liberty folks, where they claim to have 70,000 people, women, we have 500,000. And so the majority of women, suburban women, do not agree with some of this extremism that's being pushed out there. And so we wanted to make sure that we had a space, that these women had a space where their voices could be amplified.
Yeah, it's really great work. I know a number of people who are involved with Red, White, and Blue, and they often will say, I never thought of myself as political. Like they don't plug into the typical political system or don't find a place that fits them so well. Is that the case there in North Carolina as well, that some of these people are finding new ways to be engaged and are a little surprised at themselves?
Yeah. Most people are just kind of going about their days and their lives, just, working their jobs or raising their kids, trying to live their lives and put food on the table, keep a roof over their heads, and just living their lives. And so they don't think about a lot of times getting engaged, and until some of this crazy stuff gets pushed out there, where people are trying to show up at their schools and wanting to ban books, banning books about Black history, wanting to ban books about, books written by LGBTQ people. And so it's waking people up, and people are saying, wait a minute, what's going on here? People showing up at school board meetings, screaming and yelling at the school board, accusing teachers of all kinds of stuff, driving teachers away. People love their teachers, they love their schools. And so it's waking up parents to say, wait a minute, I don't agree with this. And so parents are starting to push back And so people want to people want to have their voices amplified. And what we do in Red, Wine, and Blue is try to provide an unintimidating on ramp for women to get engaged. Not everybody is comfortable um, maybe going and knocking on a door or phone banking, but we have many different ways that women can get engaged, and so that's easy to get engaged. That's unintimidating, and so women are finding opportunities to have their voices amplified.
In North Carolina, there's a particular bill that wants to protect the right of people to access contraception. It's a very straight and simple bill. Have you talked about this with any of the people involved in Red, Wine, and Blue, and are they equally as befuddled about what is going on?
Yeah, we're starting to talk about this to our women ever since Senator Grafstein filed that bill earlier this year, and of course with the Republican Party having the control over the legislature and not letting certain bills come to the floor, and then hearing how in the U.S. Congress over 195 Republicans voted against the U.S. bill, similar bill. So it's concerning to the women in our network. Now, why wouldn't
Yeah.
people want to support the right to contraception? And so women are concerned about this. And then, of course, Clarence Thomas made that statement, about contraception. So, people heard that. And so, many people didn't think they would do anything with Roe, and it shocked many people. And so many people are not going to sit around and just kind of wait and hope, and so people are starting to ask and expect and want to make sure that their representatives
Mhm.
support their right to contraception. And so women are concerned about this.
What kind of women are involved in Red, Wine, and Blue? People from faith traditions, not faith traditions? Do you not organize around the question if someone's has a background in religion or not? How do you organize?
We organize everybody. And me myself, I spent 4 years in full-time ministry myself some years
That's right.
ago. And so we reach out to all women. And we're nonpartisan, and so there are progressive women, conservative women, Democrats, Republicans, Independents. Every woman is welcome to come and get engaged with us, and so we don't discriminate. But what we find is that when it comes to the rights of women and reproductive rights, that cross the political spectrum. Women do not want government officials to be dictating what they do with their bodies.
Yeah.
They want their autonomy, and they're going to fight for it.
Yeah.
And so there are women who are from the faith tradition. There are women who may not be from the faith tradition, but they pretty much are women in our network cross the line.
Hmm. And if people want to be more engaged and get themselves one of those fancy shirts you have on right there, how do they make that happen?
So they just go to redwine.blue, redwine.blue. That's our website. And there's a shop where you can shop, go online. We
Oh,
all
is that
have all kind
so?
of cool,
Okay.
cool stuff on the way they can shop and get all kind of fun stuff that they want to purchase
And
to
ways
help
to get
support
involved.
the organization.
And there's ways to be involved locally in North Carolina as well as ways to be involved in
Absolutely.
other parts of the country.
Absolutely. We have a Facebook group in North Carolina called Red Wine and Blue, North Carolina. They can go to our website. Go to our Facebook group, join the Facebook group. But also, if they go to redwine.blue, they can click on the North Carolina landing page and get engaged. One of the things we're encouraging women to do right now is to sign up for our rally tool. We use a rally tool where women can upload their own contacts, because right now we are in the middle of an election, and we will be in the middle of an election next year. So it's a tool that women can use to help get people in their sphere of influence to make sure they get to the polls. That's what's most important, is voter turnout. So they can go to redwine.blue, and under the Take Action section, just click on Rally Your Squad. and then they can just walk right through how to use that tool to make sure that they're able to track their voters, their friends, family, associates, to make sure that they get to the polls, and it
Yeah,
is connected to
fantastic.
the voter file, so they can make sure that they can be able to make sure that they do vote.
Yeah, that's terrific. That's terrific. Anything else you want to share or talk about, or anything that you want to say?
Well, I just want to encourage people uh, to understand that you do have power. You do have power. Right now, with so much going on in North Carolina, with the way that all these the GOP having a supermajority, and they're overriding several of Governor Cooper's vetoes and passing all kinds of bills and really taking away many of our rights. It's very, very important that people don't just give up.
Mm.
I'm one of these people. I will keep fighting until my last breath. We have to mobilize, and we need to start mobilizing now for 2024. That's why I'm encouraging people to sign up to use that rally tool. We're going to be using that tool all the way through 2024, and every few weeks we'll be using it to have the women to track their people around some issues, so that people can stay engaged, keep their contacts engaged all the way through 2024.
Such great advice from Janice and Red, Wine, and Blue. I'll be picking up a theme. Our final presenter, and then we have one very short song as a blessing for you at the end of our webinar tonight. But I'll be picking up this theme that this is a real issue. People of faith and good conscience can do something about it, and being active actually makes a difference. Really does change things. So, Michael Vasquez did graduate school work in North Carolina, is working in North Carolina, has a great history of helping people become engaged. And his encouragement here, I think, is a perfect way for us to start wrapping up our evening, knowing that there is something you can do about it. And again, you can go to afcedfund.org to be able to receive information from all these groups that are doing this kind of organizing. Make sure you stay plugged in and you get that encouragement here from Michael. All right. Well, hey, Michael, thanks for being a part of this. Talk about what you do. Talk about how you do what you do, where you're organizing people for action in social and political spaces.
Yeah, I used to be an evangelical minister in the great state of Utah, and a lot of my organizing ethos and training came out of evangelicalism, and a belief that a move of the people of God can have an impact on society for good. I ultimately left that tradition in large part because of policies around LGBTQ rights, and finding other people of faith who believe deeply in the dignity of all people and the right of all people to flourish. I started organizing towards that end. And what I found along the way was a lot of people of faith, of all traditions, of all backgrounds, quote unquote conservatives to quote unquote progressives, and everyone in between, who were advocating for a society that worked for everyone and allowed for everyone to flourish. The core of what I do is to help people on the ground, whether that is in North Carolina, Wisconsin, and Washington, D.C., connect with each other around key issues that impact themselves, their communities, their families, and find pathways and avenues to advocate for the needs that they have from both their community leaders and from their legislators.
So how is it going, and how does it work? Like, what is the means? There's a lot of people who are skeptical that anything they say to a legislator is going to get through to that legislator. So talk a little bit about the effectiveness, but also the mechanisms about how it actually works and how people are interested in this conversation with legislators in North Carolina. What they can
absolutely.
happen.
Absolutely. I think a lot of folks feel like their stories don't have impact, that no one cares or no one wants to hear. about them, about the things that are impacting their families, the stories of pain, and the hopes for the future that they have. But consistently, what I hear from senators, from members of Congress, both at the state level and at the federal level, is we don't hear enough uh, people's stories. We don't hear enough of people's experiences and what they hope the future of this country will look like. And so that alone, I think, has been a critical part of the work that I do, because I think it saddens me that people think that their stories, as a part of the greater tapestry of American democracy, has no impact or value. And it's as simple as making a phone call. We heard earlier from a member in North Carolina about the impact that writing a personal email or making a personal phone call to your members can have in the decision making as they're deliberating over legislation that will impact you and your neighbors and your family members and your distant cousins. And these small acts of getting on the phone, and whether you're using a system or you're going online and calling directly through to a member's office, has a huge impact, because the story of your life, the story of my life, the story of all the people on this webinar today is the story of America. And that story needs to be told, because that helps us define not just what today means, but what the future will mean for this country.
Mm-hmm. So how does it actually work? If I were to call my representative, Ilhan Omar, and I called up, her congressional office at the federal level and said, hey, this is Doug. Is Ilhan there? Could I speak to her? That's not what's going to happen, right? I'm not going to call
Correct.
and speak directly to the representative. But people get really intimidated, and they get nervous thinking that might be what's going to happen, and they're not sure what they're going to say. So should people be nervous? And what's really going to happen when they call, whether it's a federal legislator or a state legislator? What's going to happen?
People should never be nervous. I think first and foremost, because let's say in the off chance Representative Omar gets on the phone and says, "Hey, Doug, how's it going?" That would make anyone kind of nervous. But you shouldn't be, because these members of Congress are people who we elected to serve and represent us. So that, on a baseline, they're humans. They're other humans, members of our community, hopefully, who we believe are working in our best interests. However, like you said, it is unlikely that your member of Congress will be the person on the other side of the phone call, sitting at a switchboard waiting for you to answer, to ring them. What will most likely happen is one of two things. You will get a member of their staff on the phone, or you will get their voicemail. Both of those things are still really important. 9 times out of 10, I hear people making these phone calls and they end up getting a voicemail. And I think that is often very intimidating for folks. But I think you still tell your story. You say, "Hi, Representative Omar," or whomever you're calling. My name is Michael Vasquez. I am calling because I care very deeply about the impact that access to contraception has for my community. I'm worried about the ways that certain attacks against this basic right could potentially impact the health of women and the right of families to choose how and when they start and expand their families. Thank you for your time, and I hope to hear from you soon. Right? It can be as simple as that. You tell your story. You tell why this legislation matters. It helps, right? If you name, right, I'm interested, or in this case of North Carolina, in Senate Bill 540, and why this is a key piece of legislation that will cement a fundamental right for the state of North Carolina and impact people all over our state. Now, you might get someone who is a member of the staff, which is, I think, exciting. But if you're not an extrovert, that can also be overwhelming. But I think it's the same thing. You tell them, "Hey, this is who I am. This is the piece of legislation that I'm calling about, or the issue that I'm calling about, and this is why it matters to me." And now ask them, what are you going to do to make sure that this right is protected? Or what are you going to do to ensure that our communities are safe and they don't have their rights stripped away from them? And then you have a normal conversation with another normal person on the other side of the call.
Is that what someone should expect? If they call, they're going to get into a to and fro about this topic with a staff member? Or is the staff member going to say, hey, thank you for calling, I've made a note of this, and they shouldn't expect to have a back and forth?
Most likely you shouldn't expect to have a back and forth. You might have like, oh, thank you. You might get, right? Because I've had this happen. I know folks this happen. You might get it. Oh, tell me more. If it's a light day in the office, especially at the state legislative level, right? At the federal level, you are less likely to get. Someone will say thank you. They will check off support for this bill on a list that they have on their desk, and they will move on. But at the state level, you might luck out and get some more interactive time. But 9 times out of 10, you will get like what you described. Thank you so much for your call. We really appreciate your passion and your support for this issue, and we hope to hear from you again soon. Right? And it's short and sweet. You should not expect to be on the phone more than 2 minutes tops.
All right. So, Michael, in the work you do, you must believe that these phone calls have impact. Because again, a lot of people are just skeptical about the whole process of politics and who has influence. We hear over and over that it's big money that runs the government and big money has all the influence. And those reports that we hear and ways that people describe how the halls of power function cause a lot of people to just think, well, my phone call or my email that I'm going to send is not going to make any difference in light of all of the formal, powerful, rich opposition or support that there is for a bill. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Like, how should we think about what has impact in a democracy? And is it worth people's energy and time to make phone calls and send personal emails?
Yeah, I think we have to be honest and tell people, like, yes, there are other influences that impact how our government functions. Like, we would be lying if we said there wasn't corporate influence, there wasn't the influence of dark money in our legislative, in our federal system. Absolutely. And yet, throughout all of American history, from the very inception, while there has always been these quote unquote powers that be pulling puppet strings on how the country might function, the mass movement, the mass mobilization of everyday people has always triumphed over any influence or power that operates in the shadows. Your phone call, your story, the stories of your kids who might need access to these medications because of a diagnosis that is unrelated to contraception, but needs access to this medication because they have otherwise debilitating illnesses, that story has more power than someone's dark money. The mass mobilization of people in the great state of North Carolina or any state around the union has so much more impact because you are ultimately the voter. You are ultimately the person that puts these people in office. And that's why I think it's so important that we make these phone calls. Because if we resign ourselves and say, well, my calls will never matter or my vote will never matter, then we hand over our democracy to people who we don't even know and we may never interact with, who are making decisions for us. But when we take back that power, the power of the people, to engage with our elected officials and tell them these are the issues that matter and we're going to fight for these issues. I need you to hear my story and I need you to hear that I support this legislation or this package of legislation. That has more power in the long run than any other influence in our country. Yeah, I used to be an evangelical minister in the great state of Utah, and a lot of my
Hey, sorry about that. I started that video over again. Look, I just think Michael's encouragement is so spot on. We can do something about the laws that exist. This is still a country of we the people. And we have a chance to do our part in running for office. We can do our part in voting on election day. We can do our part in influencing our legislators on the days in between election day. There's a lot we can do. And we also just need a little heart sometimes. This gets tiring. There are so many issues. I feel it very deeply in this conversation tonight, knowing all the other things that are swirling And there's so many things you have to be concerned about. So pick yours. And if this is one that's important to you, then live in it. And if so, then please head over to afcedfund.org and get on the list, and have your friends get on the list. Sign your friends up on the list and ask if it was okay. And organize them to be involved in this issue if you think it's going to matter to them. All right. Our final bit here is just very short. It's a little blessing. It's a little blessing that a person who's involved in this effort has done over on TikTok. Her name is Erin O Music, and this is a wonderful little blessing here at the end. So this will take us out. Thank you for being a part of this tonight. Again, my name is Doug Padgett, and I'm at Vote Common Good. I'd be glad to be in touch with you about any of these issues or the other work we're doing in North Carolina, if that's something interesting to you. So thank you for being a part of things tonight, and take this blessing here in your evening.
When you feel alone, take a breath and think of the people that helped you grow into who you are now. Maybe they're around, maybe they're in your heart, or the stars shining and smiling down, looking so proud. So let's take 10 seconds and remember, no one truly stands alone.
Record.